I'm going to take you through a most remarkable game from round 8 of the Berlin Candidates Tournament. Alexander Grischuk with white against Vladimir Kramnik. After 7 rounds, both these players on 50%, both looking to kickstart the second half of the tournament with a win. This game lasted 91 moves, and I'm not going to take you through all 91 of those moves. I'm going to look at the game in sections. You'll see what I mean. Let me start up. Okay, here we go. So we join the game after 17 moves. Grischuk with white is a pawn up, but it's not a particularly good pawn. You can see that's the extra one here. It's a very long way from getting anywhere. This pawn on e5, which in a middle game with the queens on the board could give you space to maybe launch an attack against the king. Well, here it doesn't contribute much at all. If anything, it can be a liability. And also, because it's advanced so far, then, you know, for example, this diagonal is open. These squares are available for black's pieces. It would actually be better placed on e4. So basically, Kramnik has compensation here with black. Let me take you through. I'm going to leap ahead to this position. And you can see that Kramnik has used his, well, greater piece activity to bring the knight to this excellent square on d5, where it's attacking the bishop and attacking the pawn here. And I mean, Grischuk could retreat the bishop to defend the pawn, but clearly he didn't want to defend passively, and he decided to eliminate this knight. Now, in this position, black's compensation is really tangible, so he's converted his activity into gaining the two bishops against bishop and knight. And this is now really hard for white to make progress. Remember, that's the extra pawn, and it's just not going anywhere at all. Okay, we leap forward a few more moves, and you can see that Kramnik is playing very actively indeed with his pieces. Let me just go back one move. In this position, Grischuk played rook e3, hitting that bishop, and now Kramnik could actually take that pawn on c3, and with it he should be able to force a draw. So let's have a look. Bishop takes pawn. Now it looks a little bit uncomfortable to put yourself into a pin. Obviously the bishop can't move, but white simply cannot exploit that. For example, you know, if you try to maneuver the knight around, then black will give a check and then be able to move the bishop. Or f3, oh, I beg your pardon, yeah, f3. Okay, the king just waits, or, you know, maybe you prepare to play g6. And if king here, then rook here, and we get a trade of pieces. And of course, that's just a draw. So this is actually a drawn position. Symmetrical pawns on the same side, must be a draw. But Kramnik said, of course he saw that, but he didn't see the danger in the position. He just didn't want to force it, he just wanted to play on. I mean, this shows incredible confidence that, you know, he felt that, well, there could even be sort of remote winning chances here. It's quite extraordinary. The players manoeuvred over the next, well, 20 or so moves. Let me leap ahead 13 moves to this position. And Grischuk has maybe made a little bit of progress. So the pawn structure hasn't changed at all, but he's managed to bring his king into the middle. The knight stands quite well here, and the bishop at least is protecting these pawns as before. And these pieces, well, they're still very active, but white is the one that's made some progress here. And here Grischuk started to advance his kingside pawns. Now, At the moment, they're not actually going anywhere. So Kramnik coming back with the rook and defending along the 8th rank. So these pawns advancing. But it's not easy to make a break on the king side. It's not clear exactly what you achieve by playing f5 or g5. Could just weaken the position. And of course, you want to get the c-pawn going, but that will leave the king exposed to checks on the side. And even advancing that pawn, well, the bishop will just retreat and it's not clear exactly what you've achieved. So Grischuk continued manoeuvring. As ever, of course, he was running a little bit short of time. So over 10 moves later, they had this position. You can see not a lot has changed. The knight has moved into d6. This bishop has moved here by Kramnik. But finally, Grischuk, he's reached the time control at move 60. So he's now got 15 minutes extra on the clock. And finally, he decides to actually start pushing some pawns. It's the only way you can make progress. You're not going to get any further with piece maneuvering. So first of all, rook here, that covers the 3rd rank. And finally, he pushed the c-pawn. But as before, it's not absolutely clear what white is doing next. It's hard to shift that bishop. And if you move the rook up to attack the bishop, then white's king is exposed along the 3rd rank. And, watch out for these pawns. Rook and bishops are a very, very strong combination of pieces. They combine really well. So Kramnik basically just waited. He put the bishop here. And now Grischuk pushed on the king side as well. Now, it's not absolutely clear what white does next. If you trade here, hasn't achieved too much. Might be nice at some point to push forward with f6 to plant a nice pawn there. But at the moment, that's not really possible. And here, I think Kramnik could have just waited with bishop g3 and just let Grischuk brood on what to do next. Sometimes that bishop can even hop round to this diagonal and start to hassle the king. But I think Kramnik saw his chance here because the position is starting to open and Grischuk, not that much time on the clock. Remember, only 15 minutes at move 60. They do get 30 seconds each time they make a move. But Grischuk was consuming a lot of time already in deciding whether to make these breaks. So Kramnik actually started to open the position. Very interesting decision. I think he sensed that he might even have a chance to win the position. Very easy for white to go wrong. And here, actually, of course, the move you want to make is to recapture with the pawn. And then you have these nice pawns alongside each other with potentially the chance to push forward later. But I think Grischuk was spooked. He obviously was worried about this move. That pawn can't take because there's a pin here. The bishop slices back to get the knight. But here, actually, Grischuk is still doing well if he finds rook b6. So the bishop moves and then he can actually push on with e6 because the rook now covers the knight. Now, I mean, this is very hard to see that this is okay because now suddenly there are loads of checks as well. But in fact, white is still all right in this position. I mean, it's kind of hanging together. This knight is on prise, but this bishop is on prise as well. Of course, in time pressure, you're not going to be able to calculate that through. So Grischuk played what looked like a much safer move. But now this is an isolated pawn and it's just not so dangerous for black. Of course, he's still got to deal with knight check. So king h7 from Kramnik, just getting the king out of the way. And he's leaving the rook here because if the rook comes down, then again, you can hassle the king. And that's why Grischuk played bishop b2 to cover this square, so he's potentially looking at some moment to play rook b6, but he's got to watch out for this check there, which would skewer king and rook. So still a really tricky position. And now Kramnik played rook e8. One could play bishop check and then bishop f3. That might be a better way to play, but still, I mean, this position is so complicated. Rook e8, I have to say, during the game, looked like the most natural move to me. I mean, just to hassle this pawn. And after knight d6, attacking rook, attacking pawn, then the rook came up. Still a really tricky position. So bishop takes pawn threatened, but also maybe f6 as well, and to take with the pawn. And unless Grischuk reacts very quickly, I mean, there is a potential, if black wins this pawn here, for black to be better after this bishop comes. Imagine the black pawn on e5, a black bishop checking, and these pawns could be vulnerable as well. Grischuk played rook b8, which certainly looks very active. And now it is possible to take that pawn and then just to duck back with the rook. But I think Grischuk would have been happy about that, because suddenly, well, white has a clear plan here. You know, he can try and kick the bishop, and somehow having traded a pair of bishops, in practical terms, that makes life much, much easier for white. So I think white certainly would have the upper hand there. I mean, probably, I mean, with best play, not enough to win, but certainly a pleasant position for white to play. Maybe that's just the most important thing in practical terms. But Kramnik played f6, and I'm not surprised he played this move, because he could potentially be better in this position if white doesn't react very quickly. But, well, Grischuk did react. He played rook here, hitting the bishop. And now bishop d7, as Kramnik pointed out afterwards, should be the best move here. And then after rook c7, pawn takes pawn. This is tricky position. So white has to take care that there isn't some kind of discovered attack here. So, well, okay, let me just make a crass blunder. So, for example, king here, then you can take with check and take the rook. So white has to take care. You know, after bishop check, the king might have to end up on a light square. But there are ways out. Rook b7 is best, so that the knight protects the rook. And white should be all right here, actually. But after rook c8, Kramnik played an extravagant move. Bishop here. I mean, this is just outrageous with these bishops back here, but they control so many useful squares on the diagonal. And now knight f5 from Grischuk. But bishop h1 is certainly a mistake. Rook b7. And here, Grischuk was running really short of time. Kramnik had a time advantage. From memory, I think he had like 5 or 6 minutes remaining. Grischuk was running right down to 0. And then each time he made a move, he'd get 30 seconds added. And here he seized the moment. He took on f6. However, he missed a win. Grischuk could have played e6. And this is a winning move. Those bishops now can't contribute to the defense. That pawn is going through because, well, I mean, obviously if rook takes bishop, then pawn here and the pawn goes through. And if rook check, and here's the clever bit, white plays bishop c3. You don't want to go back with the king because then the rook would take with check, but bishop c3 is really clever. And if rook takes bishop, then king here, and the pawn goes through. Well, there are other variations, but that's the basic idea. But instead, Grischuk took on f6, which also looks like it's winning, also looks incredibly strong. Check from Kramnik. He wants the king to go back, and then he can take with check. Or if the king goes forward, then black can take here. And there's even a threat to give a checkmate here after taking the knight. Incredible position. But Grischuk had foreseen this check here. And he planned bishop c3, just as in the other variation. And it looks like a winning move. Once again, if rook takes, then what's the best? King here or king d2? Probably doesn't make any odds, actually. We play here. Let's say the rook moves, and then we take here. And no defense to one of these. You either get a queen or you deliver mate. But Kramnik invested some time, and now he was getting dangerously short of time. Maybe he had 1 or 2 minutes left here, and he took the pawn back. Very simple. But that does expose the king. So now Grischuk stepped out of the pin. Check from Kramnik. And he brought the rook back to defend. Excellent defense from Kramnik, actually, because Grischuk just wanted to take on f6 and then deliver mate. And here Grischuk made the correct decision to trade rooks. If he tries to avoid it, then suddenly those bishops are looking really strong. In fact, it'll just be a draw. The king shouldn't go here because I think there's a problem with a rook check. Yeah, rook check and probably taking on g4. So Grischuk exchanged on b8, and as he was running right down to the wire with his time, in any case, an excellent practical decision. And here, this was where Grischuk played absolutely brilliantly. How many would simply snap off that pawn and think, well, you're 2 pawns up? But here, of course, it's possible for black to make a draw after this and then attack the knight. Knight moves, or you trade it off and you take here. Draw. Instead, he used up more time and found knight e7. He was down to his final few seconds. It's a really clever move. Basically, he just wants to bounce around here and take the pawn on f6 with the knight, and that hassles the king and defends the pawn on g4. And here Kramnik should play king g7, and that gives him a chance to defend like this. And it's a similar kind of idea. You can see that those bishops shut out the king, and then black's bishop just wants to come here, hassle the knight, and then take on g4. Seems that's good enough for a draw. But instead, Kramnik threw in a couple of checks. But this actually brought white's king to a better position where it can defend the g-pawn. Only then did he bring the king across. But now the knight switched back, and this is incredibly powerful. Obviously, trading just gives white a winning position. That pawn is too strong, and it's a very simple position for white to play. So after check, the king came to f7. If king h7, then this time this is winning, because the king is able to defend the pawn. Well, the pawn can't be attacked, and this is too much for black. So king I beg your pardon. After knight f5 check, king f7 by Kramnik, and now excellent move. Of course, bishop d2. You want to trade bishops, simplify the position, and then that knight can get on h6. So, I mean, this is completely lost. So Kramnik kept the bishops on, and now Grischuk took pawn number 2. Now, king e6 played by Kramnik. Good move. Bishop came back, making room for the h-pawn. And here, Kramnik took the knight. I think if he played king f7, there is still a lot of work for white to do, actually. I'm sure white is winning this position. but it keeps some complexity in the position. But Kramnik grabbed that pawn. He was dreaming somehow that he might be able to draw this position, but this is utterly lost now. And it's a simple win for white. That's the point. So first of all, the king is kept busy with the h-pawn. And now the c-pawn rolls. And here's the point. White is going to play bishop f4 and knock the bishop out of the way. Bishop moves and the pawn gets to c7. So the king has run over to stop the pawn, but, well, it's hopeless. 2 pawns on the 7th, and now Grischuk just has the very simple task of bringing the king over. And here Kramnik resigned on move 91. So, for example, if the bishop retreats, then we play king here. Okay, I mean, black can do nothing in this position. King here and bishop e5, trade bishops, and pawn goes through. Fantastic game, and I think what makes it so complicated is that there were so many different phases to the game. The early middle game or early end game with all the pieces on the board, and then this manoeuvring for ages to try and get a pawn break in, try and get c4 and f5 in. And then it retained its complexity with even mating nets appearing for both sides. Even the king on h7 could find itself in trouble sometimes. And yeah, even complex right down to this position at the end, which Kramnik could have at least set a few more difficulties there. An extraordinary game. So that means all the other games were drawn, I should say. Caruana is at the top with 5.5. Mamedyarov has 5. Grischuk now on 4.5. Ding on 4, still on 50%. And Kramnik and Karyakin on 3.5. Aronian on 3 and Wesley So on 2.5. So we've now played 8 rounds and we're into the second half of the tournament, and Caruana still on top.